Hi again then guys, and welcome to another revisiting of Spirit of Le Mans in its updated new format with multiple camera angles and not a potato cam on this occasion. And this car is one of the most famous examples of a misnamed vehicle, of course, in Gran Turismo, the Mercedes CLK LM, as it was finally correctly called in the later games, initially called the CLK GTR. There are some more than subtle differences between the two though. The engine, for instance, the bodywork is very different on them, and although the CLK GTR is not officially in these later games, it was originally planned for widespread release in Gran Turismo 2, I believe it was, and I think it actually is in some versions, or at least some coding of those earlier games, if not just GT2. And to be honest, I actually would have preferred a CLK GTR over a CLK LM, but this is the car that we had from Gran Turismo 4 to Gran Turismo 6. I personally don't see this one necessarily returning anytime soon. It would seem fairly obvious to bring back a CLK GTR instead if you were going to go down that route, or even the CLR, which I'd actually love to see, the even rarer one. But as far as this car goes, it's kind of like the Pajamas. In fact, it's very, very similar to that car. Not in terms of any particular spec or even the way it performs, but in terms of how it very easily lags behind, unfortunately, a lot of the other prototypes, be it GT1s, Group Cs, LMPs, that are in the game. And that issue is something which will occasionally arise in Gran Turismo, not so much in GT Sport, but even in GT Sport you can kind of see how the Group Cs don't really do a good job of keeping up with the modern LMPs anymore because the game is more realistic, especially when it comes to downforce and cornering ability. That is how it should be, really, because the biggest advantage that a Group C car should have is arguably straight line power, and since that is neutered in GT Sport, well, of course they're not going to have really any advantage over a newer car. However, a vehicle like this falls somewhere in the middle ground. It's not quite a full-on hardcore old-school Group C, but of course it didn't fully transition into the very impressive LMP era with the Bentleys, Audis, Peugeots, etc. It's in a little bit of a middle ground between the two, just like the Panos. Now the Panos definitely suffers even more than this one. This one weighs the same as a Nissan R390, which is exactly 1 metric ton, or 1,000 kilos, which I believe is something like 2,200 pounds. 2,204 comes to mind, but I'm not certain on that. As far as the performance though, it is a good car, it's just not a great one, and that's the issue with the CLK LM. It actually handles more like a really, really high-end touring car than it does a prototype. I actually have always liked this car, and in Gran Turismo 5, I believe it was actually the race car that I used the most. If I recall correctly, I think you actually win this vehicle for some kind of mission event, I think it was. It might have been the Mercedes AMG Series Challenge or something like that, but I know that it was a car that I put lots of miles on in Gran Turismo 5, and it has always been a good choice in Gran Turismo. It is a dependable car. It doesn't really surprise you or shock you or even catch you out in terms of its handling or performance. It pretty much does what you'd expect it to do. It's a good car. The problem is, it's going up against cars that more often than not are either much lighter, or more crucially, way more powerful, because even in its fully tuned form, this is still one of the least powerful of these prototype style machines that are in the game. The BMW V12 LMR is not that powerful, but even that has more than this. This has 953 horses, fully tuned. That's a good 200 or even 300 horsepower less than some of the others, including stuff like the Peugeot 908, the Audi R10, and even stuff from its time, like the Toyota GT1, is more powerful. It stacks up pretty well against the Panos, and it actually has a 150 kilo weight advantage over that car, so if anything, I would actually recommend taking this one up against stuff like the Panos, of course, maybe the Lister Storm as well, which has a ridiculous weight disadvantage, or even something like perhaps the McLaren Longtail, the Team Finer liveried BMW one. Even that car can probably beat this one though, 9 times out of 10, and in terms of the overall use that you can get out of a CLK LM, especially given the price, it's not cheaper than any of the others either, it's 1.8 million. It is a somewhat niched vehicle. Unfortunately, it doesn't really have its primary rival in the game to go up against, and that is of course the Porsche 911 GT1. That would be ideal to go up against this car, but as it is, it feels mismatched. It's as simple as that. The CLR, as I said, I believe would be a stronger contender. It has more of that full-on prototype approach, The LM, on the other hand, it doesn't even necessarily feel as hardcore as arguably the CLK GTR would. If I recall correctly, I think at least some variations of the CLK GTR did use a V12 in their racing form, whereas this is a 5-litre V8, which is an interesting engine, but even the engine isn't as exotic as the GTR is. In terms of the torque to accompany that power, again, it's good. It's got 805 pound-feet, which is nothing to be sniffed at, and of course the horsepower per tonne is still very good fully tuned. Because of the fact that it weighs 1,000 kilos, it puts out over 950 horsepower per tonne, which is great by anyone's standards. The problem is, it's going up against stuff like Group C cars, which can easily be pushing 1,200, 1,300 horsepower per tonne and have incredible performance. The simple fact is, the CLK LM has no significant advantage whatsoever over any of the other prototypes in the game, and I think that that's a shame, because it's a really cool car. It is an iconic race car, it's one of the most iconic Mercedes cars, it's always been one of the fastest Mercedes models in the game, and of course it's easily overshadowed by the Sauber C9, but at least in Gran Turismo 4, you couldn't buy the Sauber, you could only win it, so you didn't end up using that car all that much, because it was a fairly difficult car to win, especially for those of us who were kids when we played the game. I believe you had to win the Formula Gran Turismo World Series to unlock that C9, whereas the CLK LM, if I recall, I think you could just buy it, and it was a good car. But in this game, even in Gran Turismo 5, that's not the case. It's a car that you can buy alongside the others, so it doesn't even have that advantage. There's no price advantage, there's certainly no weight advantage, it's not the most powerful thing out there. Even stuff like trivia, like, oh, it's got a big engine, it doesn't even have anything like that going for it either. But, to be clear, all of that notwithstanding, it's not a bad car, by any stretch, and I think that's the most unfortunate thing, and I've alluded to this a number of times throughout the review, and it wouldn't surprise me at all if, in my review for this years ago, in the potato cam days, I probably said something fairly similar, and that is that it's actually a good car in every way. It's just not a great car, unfortunately, in any way. It's serviceable. But the fact is, you have to be a lot more than just serviceable to take down the likes of Mazda 787Bs, Toyota Minolta 88CVs, Sauber C9s, and certainly the newer stuff like Pascarolos, Audi R10s and Bentleys. It's just not good enough. Now with the right driver you can win some events, but as soon as you get up to those same kind of competitor levels, when they're in the better cars, forget it, you don't stand a chance. Even myself, I used to love using the Panos because I wanted to support the car and the team, but I knew I wasn't going to win because the car just wasn't good enough. The CLK LM is just like that. You can win some events, you can certainly win in career mode, and it's a gorgeous collector's piece and a very iconic one. Just don't expect it to be anywhere near as good as it used to be in Gran Turismo. It's kind of like the Nissan R390 as well in that way. That car used to absolutely dominate, but once the faster cars started being included, it just lost the edge. For me, that's kind of what the LM feels like as well. Ultimately though, that's it for my thoughts on the car. Certainly not a car that I dislike by any stretch, and I would love to hear your thoughts on it down below. Did you used to use this one a lot as I did in GT5? Do you still love the car? As I said, tell me about it down in the comments, and until next time, I'll see you then. But for now, as always, thanks for watching.